Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Brooke Thomas. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path. And what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? In today's episode of Bliss and Grit, we're answering a listener's question on our SelfCompassion episode. She asks things like, is there no place for self-discipline, for pushing yourself to do the things that you know could be good for you, even though you don't want to? How can you differentiate between fear holding you back from taking an action versus a genuine yearning for a different experience? And how can we listen better to what's the right medicine for ourselves at any given time? In this episode, we're exploring the subtle edges of compassion, indulgence, and discipline on the spiritual path. If you're enjoying the show, we'd be totally delighted if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. It helps people find us, and it helps us feel like we're building a rich community over here. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to hear about updates on events we may have in the near future. One last note before we head into the conversation. Brooke and I have a way of cursing frequently, so if there are kids around, you may want to pop in some headphones. Okay, everyone, here we go.
Hello, Vanessa.
Good afternoon, darling.
I love when we get rockin' questions about an episode that we put out. So today is a Dear Bliss and Grit episode. We heard from lovely Heidi about our SelfCompassion episode that came out, I guess, 2 weeks ago. So what I'm going to do is read her questions a teensy-weensy bit edited. So my apologies to you, Heidi. And I've got so much to say about it.
I can't wait to hear all that you have to say about it.
I'm sure it's going to be a belly flop, like not as satisfying as I want it to be because I have too much I want to say, but that's okay. Okay, so here is Heidi's question. Your latest episode on self-compassion really got my gears turning. I've been thinking a lot about what it looks like to be kinder to ourselves in real life, and I have a question. Here's what I'm wondering. When might self-compassion include challenging our assumptions about what we need or want, especially if we're feeling dysregulated or inside a pain body? I'm thinking there are perhaps times when it could be useful to cultivate something like an inner parent or a wiser part of ourselves that has a loving quality, which is more firm or fierce rather than soft. Are there times when it would be loving to say to yourself firmly, I know you don't feel like it, but you really need to move your body or meditate or do some work or whatever? I guess the question might be, when is it avoidance resistance that's steering the ship, telling you to lie in bed and not do anything? And when is it a genuine honoring of what you need or of something not feeling truly aligned? Having grown up in a very New England work ethic and an emphasis on a huge amount of striving, I think much like Brooke, yes, much like me, I definitely appreciate how important it is to be softer and gentler with myself. On the other hand, I have also experienced how oftentimes the last thing I feel like doing when I'm anxious or down is the very thing that might actually make a difference. I guess the last part of this inquiry is where the idea of self-discipline fits in, or of having practices that ground us on a daily basis, no matter what is currently arising. Is there ever value in sticking with something that might initially or occasionally feel shitty because it's a new habit? When we're pointing our compass away from what feels shitty, how do we determine if the shitty feeling is just one of fear or conditioning, or a genuine sense of, this isn't right? So that's a fantastic question. I think you're not alone. I think a lot of people have this question. I know Vanessa and I have this question. It's a constant discovery. So we're not nailing it. And I feel like I need to breathe into a paper bag. I have so much I want to say. I'm so excited.
That's good, because I don't have a ton I want to say yet. So
yeah, and I know you will as we go.
Just bounce off of you. But the one thing I do want to say that I was thinking about when you first read this question to me was there is not a prescription really.
Yeah.
And this is problematic. It's problematic on social media where we have these beautiful little memes that like point in one direction. It's problematic because A, things are often paradoxical, and B, different medicine, different moment, different time.
Totally.
So like, I think I read it was like an Eckhart Tolle quote, and he said something like, essentially, I'm going to post this and I'll post the correct quote, but essentially something like, it's the attitude, not the behavior that like drives the energy, right? Like that drives the karma. And that's what I think. It's like, a lot of what we need to be looking at in these moments is who are we? So if you're that striving person and you know that's part of your identity and you know it's part of your defense system and your pain body wiring, then you are likely going to need that softness. And if you're someone who was taught always to avoid the hard things, always to just be kind to yourself and indulge and don't overdo it, then maybe you're going to be bringing in the medicine of discipline in a certain regard, and that will hold love. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the dilemma when we have these conversations is we don't actually have a prescription. You know, a lot of it is experimentative. Like you have to, is that a word?
I like it. If it's not a word, it should be a word.
Experimentative. Like you have to experientially go into it and try something on for size and then watch the voices and then feel into the nuances and feel into the constrictions. And like, is this tying me further up in knots or is this bringing me home to myself?
Right.
And unfortunately, there's nothing we can say that will totally illuminate it for every single person because, well, A, we're still feeling into those edges for ourselves, but B, we're all starting at these different places. So there will be different medicine at different moments. At least that's part of my answer.
Yeah, I think that you're getting at, because the reason why I get like overwhelmed and excited with how much I want to say is that there's so much to this. There's a lot of questions in it and there's a lot of things underpinning it. And I think one of the big ones is what you started with, which is there is no prescription. That is not at all what we're up to. And of course, we all live within the cultural veil that is prescriptive. So our brains automatically go for what is the prescription they're telling me to have? You know, be softer, be harder, push myself, lay around. You know, that's just the nature of how we are all, literally all of us, we grow up wired to that, to seek that very quickly. But that's not, you know, what we're trying to do. Instead, it's an invitation to listen to yourself. It's an invitation to get to know yourself. And that's going to have a great deal of subtlety and nuance. And like you said, Vanessa, the action cannot be predicted. You know, like it's never good to get angry, right? Like that's a very common one, particularly for women. It's never, or in the spiritual world for sure, right? It's never good to be mad. Well, it's like, that's just a prescription. That's not an alive thing. Like there are moments where it's quite true and critical and necessary and beautiful to be angry. So there's no, you know, but that would emerge naturally in a moment. So that's the first piece, you know, like we have to really make sure that we're not trying to push ourselves into something. So the cultural piece that we're all dealing with is that we do live, I would say Western culture, but very much in particular American culture. There's this idea that we need to make ourselves do things. So there are all these things that get called into question when you're on the spiritual path or whatever you want to call it. Like, are we, you know, do we need to be people who get it together? Do we need to be on a constant striving self-improvement project? Do we need to do we do anything? Are we in control of actually what unfolds in our lives? And like, these are big questions. So I don't expect anyone, including myself for sure, to navigate these things perfectly, but they're interesting questions, like, because they lead us to fresh places and places that feel juicy, like they feel alive and delightful. And I guess that's the other big underpinning here is like, what are we going for? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, well, I would say what we're going for is less suffering. Meaning, which doesn't mean just like sitting around in a room with like a placid half smile on.
Never reading the newspaper, never talking to anyone, because all people evoke suffering.
Because that is suffering, because that's hiding from the world and yourself, and that's fear-based, right? Which is suffering. Fear is a kind of suffering, a very dominant kind of suffering. But what we're going for is like having a life that feels nourishing, that feels delightful, that feels alive. So like even with non-delightful things that come up, that you can meet those things in an alive way. So we're not going for what a lot of the culture is going for, which is a compelling after picture in the before and after picture genre. I got it together. I achieved happiness. I earned this much. I look like this in jeans. I battled back depression. It's a lot of this war kind of like conquering language that is only interested in the shiny object. And actually, I was just listening to Jeannie Zandy's interview on Bat Gap, Buddha at the Gas Pump, which I'll put in the show notes for everyone, the actual interview with her, which was, it talks about a lot of this actually. And so for any of you really wanting to dive deep on this, listen to that interview because it's super juicy and she's a beautiful teacher. And she was saying, our culture has this obsession with unhealthy yang to the detriment of never paying attention to the yin. And she was giving an example, I'm paraphrasing. Obviously, she does a better job. But like, if there's a seed, we don't want to know about the seed in the ground germinating. We just want the flower. And it would be silly to like yell at a germinating seed, like, just be a fucking flower already, But that's what we do to human beings in our culture all the time. We don't have any tolerance for anything that's not the flower. Mm-hmm. And anything that's not the flower is considered a failure. But a germinating seed is not a failure. It's a process. It's a beautiful, alive, unfolding process. So it's like a really important distinction to make. Like what conversation are we actually having over here on Bliss and Grit or over here on the spiritual path? Because it's different from the one that gets held up a lot, that we just see a million times a day, like in advertising and in conversations. And
oh my God, now I have so much to say. I can't even
I knew, right? I'm just like, I have to.
I just had to wake up post-massage and now my brain is like, okay. It was funny. I saw this thing on Instagram today, I think it was, and it was posted by people I adore that are wonderful. It's a meditation studio. But it was like, one of those simple memes. And it was something like, I feel worse after meditation, said no one ever. And I'm like,
I can say that. Are you kidding? Do you remember? I can't even count how many times I've felt awful.
Yeah, you've clearly never done embodiment meditation.
Oh my gosh. It's like dredging the fucking depths.
But, like talking about that level of like, what are we talking about? Like what level of experience are we talking from? And, I sent you that quote the other day from this book that I'm utterly obsessed with. It's called The Spectrum of Ecstasy. Don't read it unless you have a real spiritual practice for a long time, because otherwise it's just a little complicated. But, so basically, okay, there's these beautiful teachers and they were talking about positive thinking and how positive thinking was like not where it's at. They're very much in alignment with us. Like, Bliss and Grit, don't try to force your attention into one aspect of reality because, you run a great risk of bypassing. And then, the way that a lot of these Buddhist books are written, it's like the teachers are teaching and then students ask questions and, the teachers respond, and then they're actually just transcribed. And that's how this was. So the student said, like, is there no room for positive thinking? Like, I don't get it. Kind of like what Heidi was asking in the question in part. She wasn't just saying this, but like,
yeah, she was saying to motivate yourself to do something you don't want to do. Yes.
For these wonderful tools that kind of shift you into a different state of being. Is there no room for that? And the teacher was like, yes, of course there's room for that, depending on your goal. If you're, like just trying to function better in this lifetime, yeah, positive thinking is super great.
Yeah, if it works, like.
Well, if you're just trying to function better.
We're never going to argue against something that works.
Yeah. And he said, but if you are a devout spiritual practitioner and your aim is truth and unfolding and awakening, no, there's no room for positive thinking. Because it's just a distraction from direct experience. It's just another way that our ecosystem can grasp at something. And, I was all like, oh my God, Brooke, like, because I think it is important to differentiate. And there might be some people listening who you just want to function better in your life. You're not on some like spiritual quest the way Brooke and I were compelled on.
Yeah, no one chooses it, by the way.
Yeah, like we were just compelled.
It chooses you, and then it's like,
and then it don't let you go.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, a lot of what we're talking about when we're looking at this nuanced level is like, yeah, well, maybe if you got yourself to do some mindfulness meditation every day, maybe if you got yourself to move your body every day, you will function better. Like you'll be a little lighter, your mood will be a little more elevated because these things are true. I mean, exercise helps that. Mm-hmm. It alleviates depression. And we can't speak enough about management tools. I've used them most of my life. They're wonderful. But if what you're aiming at is like some genuine healing experience of the constrictions that have bound you up so you can live in who you really are, they start to become just more of the type of thing that creates constriction from your real identity. Like then eventually those props become tiresome because it's fucking exhausting managing your life.
Yeah, that's the thing that we don't realize until we have an opportunity to glimpse not managing our lives. We don't know how tired we are.
Yes, it's really, really tiresome. And like, I feel senseis run into this all the time, right? It's like, because any really aware sensei knows, okay, this person bothers me, so I won't stay around that person. And I need this number of hours of sleep. And I have to move my body like this. And I definitely need my Rolfing. And like, I shouldn't eat like this. And God bless, like no one's saying don't do that. I do that. Brooke does that. There's a certain amount that we manage our experience, but then those tentacles go even further and we're like managing people's moods so that they don't get too distressed because then that triggers us. And then we feel we have to fix them. And like we go down a rabbit hole and then we're managing our psychology. Like I can't be in a bad mood or I shouldn't feel down or I shouldn't feel ungrateful. And we're managing that so that we're always
I shouldn't need a half a day in bed.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
I shouldn't ask for help. I shouldn't be that kind of person who, doesn't have their childhood figured out. Like, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where we're looking is at that level of subtlety. Like, the one last thing that I just had to say before I'll stop talking so much, but a long time ago, I used this analogy with my clients all of the time. So if you're a client listening, you will recognize this. Long time ago, my friend Dreama, who may be listening, and hi Dreama.
Hi Dreama. We love you.
We love you. I don't even know if Dreama knows that she passed this on to me and how much I use it. So she was telling me about being trained as a runner. She used to run track. And one of her coaches said to her that, with the run, you have the inhale and the exhale, right? Like obviously your breath is crucial to really running. And he said, the thing is that with the inhale, you don't have to pay a lot of attention to it because the body automatically inhales. The body is not going to let you die. So it's always taking in the next breath. But the exhale, that's the area where you have to really bring your mindfulness, because the exhale is like what the body doesn't do automatically. It's like where we can hold our breath, where we could do it staccato. And I don't know why this like stuck with me, but the analogy always stuck because I feel like we have a certain inhale. So for example, Heidi's inhale, your inhale, Brooke, may be just work harder and you'll figure it out. Just put in a little more effort and you'll figure it out. That's the inhale. And the exhale may be how to be soft, how to be compassionate, how to go for safety first. So what I noticed is everyone is always worried about their inhale. Like that's their default. They're always like, but shouldn't I, do that thing that I think is really effective and like strive more? And what I always want to say to them is you can take your attention off of the inhale and put it on the exhale. Mm-hmm. Because if, let's say, you're a striver, you're not going to stop.
Right. You don't have to worry about working hard if you are a hard worker.
That's what you do. That's your inhale. That's your zone. That's how you flow. So you don't need to worry about it. And it is going to operate. You can trust that. I've seen this like for years and years and years and years with clients. You can trust that. But the exhale will not happen if you do not put your attention on it. And so for a little while, you may find you having to put quite a bit of focus on what you're not naturally inclined towards. So again, like I've had some clients that all they want is me to give them a blankie, a cup of tea, and like tell them, everything's going to be okay. And that's wonderful. But at a certain point, they do have to put attention on their exhale, which is how to motivate themselves, mm-hmm. how to find some discipline, how to love themselves enough to do the actions that create peace within, right? And then that's their exhale. And they won't forget the inhale of how to like give self-care.
Yeah.
So that's where I think like that level of nuance is and understanding yourself and what medicine is right for you at this moment, which may not be the same in the next moment.
Right. And that's where it comes down to getting to know ourselves and listening to ourselves. Because if you're doing something, like let's say you say, I'm going to meditate for 30 minutes every morning and every evening. So here's this big blanket statement, this commitment, and it doesn't matter if you're in the mood or not, you're going to do it, right? If that is helpful, that's great. Like if that helps your life to unfold in a way more nourishing, more delightful, all these things, right? More alive. Great. Some of us come to the end of the road of being able to manage our lives from the level of the mind. And all the normal things, I'm sitting in meditation 2 times a day for 30 minutes. I've been doing that for 4 months and I only feel exhausted, consumed with dread, blah, blah, blah. Then forcing yourself into that shaped box isn't useful. You've come to the end of the road there. That's an end of a road. And so then you have to feel into what can help. And I think this is where people, all of us, get up against like the spiritual idea that to have any desires is bad. And that feels like in my body, like a profound shame, like a sitting on myself and like a freeze almost. Like I'm not allowed to want anything that's not actually happening right here in the moment. And this is where, like, I think that there are desires that are born from the mind. I wouldn't use the word desire. I would call them goals. I would call them grabby hands, and then there are desires that are born from what I would say are your true nature or source or whatever. So there's a lot of swimming into yourself to be able to tease apart what's doing the talking when you have a desire or a longing. And this is where getting to know ourselves and what you and I are talking about is this very, very, very intimate moment to moment way comes in handy. So I was trying to think of a vapid example or something that's super boring. And I was thinking about, because I've gained like 10 pounds this winter, and I was like, okay, this is a great one because this is like very common. people in our culture hate weight gain. You're not together if you've gained 10 pounds, right? But then it's like, but is it good for your health? You know, so you can see all this stuff, right? Okay. So like 2 different scenarios. In both scenarios, the thought is, I want my thighs to be smaller and less dimpled. Okay. Both scenarios. In one, I could go, okay, that's bad. I do no to this. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to jump out into the future, and here's my goal. Different looking thighs. And so here's my plan to get to my goal. Doesn't matter if I'm tired, doesn't matter if I'm cranky, doesn't matter whatever. This is unacceptable. I'm going to eat paleo and I'm going to join CrossFit, and in 3 months, my thighs are going to look different. Now, if you do that, and what you find is that you arrive
laughing about talking about your thighs.
I know. I had to go with something boring. Like, I don't know. I talked abusive relationship last time. I was like, I got to be a little bit more boring, or more banal. And also I think, God, especially women, Jesus Christ, in our culture with our bodies, we can all relate to this. So if you do that and you arrive at the other side with different looking thighs and you are thriving, your health is better. You feel good for having moved that way. You've come home to yourself in a way where you feel more compassionate towards your body. Okay, great. You know, I don't think that's always what happens. I do think it happens sometimes, which is why, like, you have to let yourself feel in. And I would say that if you're one of the people that arrives on the other side of that and you feel good, like everything's nourishing and sustainable and, beneficial, then there's something you felt into that was about truth for you, that led you to exactly the path that unfolded. You know, this paleo cookbook, this particular gym, this, and that was a listening and that was an unfolding that happened in the moment to moment way, you know? So the other, I want my thighs to look different person, like you could go the spiritual way and be like, I accept my thighs. And it's like, well, no, there's something underneath the desire for different looking thighs that is this very genuine call to be suffering less. But the suffering less isn't necessarily about what the thighs look like. It's about being able to come home to yourself in a way where you don't even have that disgust. And that's like a warrior fucking journey that, like, I can't spell out in a blueprint for people. And it has ups and downs and it has nuance. And at the end of that journey, your thighs might look different. They might be more toned and less pimply. I don't know. Like, they might be less cellulite-y. I don't know. But the point is, like, what you want is not necessarily the thighs. You want the not suffering about the way you feel about your thighs. And so that's what we're pointing towards. Like, if you can drop in and that's not perfect, that doesn't mean sit on yourself and don't desire anything different. And it doesn't mean jump out there and strive towards something, some goal. It's like, let it unfold, you know, because maybe the unfolding is towards a different way of moving, being, eating that gives you more nourishment, health, vitality, fitness, happiness. Great, you know. But I think we see a lot that people undertake the exact same actions towards an outcome, and what they find is exhaustion and self-loathing and body dysmorphia and can never do enough for themselves and they're tired. So it's like the actions don't matter. They're going to be very individual to each person and situation, and it's a step-by-step thing. It's not like you have to keep checking in with yourself, you know? And those are the journeys that are really surprising, and they unravel you to a much more profound place when you can really be listening to yourself. Because, like, coming home to how your thighs look, like, and not needing them to look different, and not sitting on yourself and saying you're a bad person for wanting to not have gained 10 pounds. Like, that is just like, I can't even describe the amount of warriorship that even in an example like this, that's just so boring and so basic. It's amazing when you have to really put your ear to the ground and just love yourself through it and be curious through it.
It makes me think about when we were first getting coached by our first life coach. It's amazing. We shared so many.
I would love to have some kind of like past life remembrance that people talk about and figure out what you and I have been to each other. Because it is weird. The synchronicity is always so weird.
So anyway, I remember accomplishing a ton of goals. And I did feel kind of proud sometimes, like, oh, that feels great to be making more money and to have my business more organized, but never liking myself any better, never feeling more self-love, never feeling more at ease, never feeling better in my relationship. Like, it didn't change the inside experience, which is what we're all after, is a different experience inside: peace, happiness, contentment, gratitude, fill in the blanks. And so that's why the action itself is not predictive. It's like the intentionality underneath the action. Is it one that is literally born from compassion and love?
Right.
The way like a parent would do for their child. Because yes, if your child was scared of a bully at school, you would talk to them and you would soothe them, and maybe you do something really kind, like walk them all the way to the front door if they're little and hold their hand. And maybe you would even stay outside if they needed for a little bit. And maybe you'd pick them up from school and you would do all these kind actions. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to send your child to school, right? Because you know that that's what they need to do for their highest good. There is a movement of love and compassion that describes sometimes doing something that is an edge for you, but because it's for your best.
Yeah.
But most of us are not at that. That's just not where we're at. Most of us are actually just being really shitty and hard on ourselves. That's the truth.
Right. Because that's our cultural framework.
Yeah. That's really how we're programmed. I had this friend the other day, and he was talking to me, and he got really re-traumatized. And he meditates, and he's a pretty new meditator, but a meditator. And he has a friend who's a long-term meditator, meditates all the time. So the friend keeps saying, you need to meditate, just meditate. That'll calm you down. And it's wrong, because his friend is actually in a real, genuine state of PTSD and does not have years of practice under his belt. Maybe that would make a difference, very new to meditation. And what he needed was to find safety first. Yeah. Just find safety first. That's really what he needed. It's like, find where safety is in your body, learn to reorient towards safety. That's the compassionate movement. Him sitting still, watching the trauma like vortex through his brain and through his body without any support was not a very kind nor helpful move. Yeah. And in fact, it just turns a person off from meditation. It's like, meditation's not the problem. You actually just, if you listen to yourself, what you needed was something different, some reorientation towards safety. I think in his case, he really did. He actually even gave himself a day where he like sat in bed and like watched Netflix. Not that they listened to us. It was like just what they wanted to do. Right. But felt shitty and guilty the whole time.
Right. Instead of nourished and like rested.
Instead of like, oh, this makes perfect sense. I'd want a day in bed. I'm completely triggered. I am in such a trauma response. I should give this to myself. That's a very kind thing. Because then from that approach, we have a different experience unfold. And I was thinking a lot about like, this is part of what drew me into Dharma Ocean and Reggie's approach to meditation. I think it could be a useful conversation here. So it's like, when you first learn this style of meditation from Dharma Ocean, it's the kindest, most compassionate meditation because you do almost all of it laying down, which is very unusual, right? And for a lot of people, the sitting posture in meditation is one of the real challenges, like sitting up. And Reggie's reasoning, as I understand it, total misquote, but a lot of it was, most of us don't know how to relax. We just don't know how to relax. And so we jam ourselves up into these sitting positions, forcing ourselves to keep it together, keep still, don't move. We tense everything. We then get mental constrictions. Like, I can't believe you're moving. How could you do that? You're a shitty spiritual person, and like all of these things are taking place on the cushion. And that's really antithetical to the journey that you're undertaking in meditation. So he lets you lay in the beginning, and it's like learning how to find safety in your body, learning how to find ease and relaxation. And then you work your way towards sitting up. So first ease and relaxation, then sitting up with ease and relaxation. And then eventually he goes on to like 7 hours of disciplined meditation where you can't move your hands at all.
Right. Sitting fully upright.
Right. Which is sort of what Heidi might be like, pointing us at, right? Like, isn't there a time and place for discipline? And it's like, yes. But after we learn softness, so we know what softness is like. After we learn relaxation, so we know what relaxation is like. After we learn ease, because until you learn that basic ground of what compassionate action and ease and relaxation feel like, you will unnecessarily drive yourself because you just don't even know. It's like, if you don't know what yin and yang is, like you can't find the middle way.
And we're in a culture that's like very just yang. And so we don't have the experience of the other. Yeah.
Right. And if you weren't taught by your primary role models, we certainly weren't really taught it well culturally. Did you see one of our listeners was posting like, you guys need some Aussie in you.
Oh yeah. I was like, sold.
Right. Like,
I'll go
there. So let's look at that. Like, so, when we say culture, we're definitely talking about Western culture. It's cool to hear about like other people's approaches, but in our culture, we're pretty much moved towards driven, hard work, effort, and you suck, do more. You suck, fix it.
Be shinier, be brighter, be more this, less that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no then ease or relaxation. You don't know the other way.
Yeah.
So first, maybe you will err to an extreme. I don't even know if that's possible, but potentially it's like doing this class that we're doing with Kieran. If I really didn't want to meditate, I let that go. And then eventually now I'm like, all right, come on, you can come back to it. And it feels like a really like kind nudge. Like it feels like
it's loving. Nudge. It's not shoving yourself into something.
Yeah. And so I feel like, God, there is this leap of faith, this trust yourself, trust your life movement where you do have to trust this is my inhale. I'm not going to give this up forever. It's impossible. And I'll come back around to it. But the first thing I need to do is learn how not to tie myself more up in knots and like learn how to meet myself in the moment, because that's a skill most of us do not have.
Yeah.
And then once I have that skill, now I have this kind of like clear vision of how to move it in a different direction.
Yeah. It makes me want to talk about letting go of the reins, and that one of the really big underpinnings underneath all this that we're pointing to is something that gets corny phrases attached to it, or phrases that have been corrupted enough to sound corny. Things like God is good. Like I think that that's the hardest thing for us to believe. First of all, that we're not doing our lives are doing us, even though we think we're in control with the mind. And that's just something that's either experienced or not. As your life goes on, you don't need to force yourself to believe it or experience it. So just hold that very lightly. But it's that there is something that is not just this thinking mind, and not just this list of rules, and not just this blueprint towards what an American success looks like. There's something moving me and moving through my life, and it is good. Like it has my best interest at heart. It is my best interest at heart. And so I won't always, if I listen to that and it says, lay down today, and I lay down today, it's going to keep talking to me, and it won't always say lay down today. At some point, what's in my best interest will be a movement outwards towards the world, which can take a million different flavors. But if I'm listening instead of puppeteering myself, something way more intelligent than me, and this is a spiritual show, so we're allowed to say these things, whether people can get into this or not, but like something way more intelligent than me is going to move my life in a direction that's more juicy, alive, and easeful. And I want that because I'm fucking tired of suffering, quite frankly. Like, I have come to the end of my road where my management systems from the level of the mind and puppeteering myself, they don't work anymore. I had a very hard end of my road, and it's been a deconstruction for years since then. And I'm still the mushy bit inside of the cocoon, So it's like I haven't emerged. But what I know is that the more that I trust that there is this intelligence that's more vast and more loving than my mind, it will then say, okay, you gained 10 pounds this winter. Let's go back to the banal example. Like, you know what I would like? I would like a long hike. And I would genuinely like that. It feels really good. Now, maybe the mind would say I need to join my friend's boot camp, and it's all complicated. The hours it happens doesn't work for me, and it's 3 towns over, and it doesn't work with school drop. But no, like the I would like sends me some. And then maybe after that, it's like, oh, I would like to play with my kettlebell in the living room. I haven't done that in a while. So this is so fun. Like, this is an example. You're still doing all the things, but you're doing them from a place of desire, and not because at the end I'd better get sleek thighs. It's because there's some genuine desire to feel good about my body, right? That's a genuine desire. It's okay. It's okay to want that. And then if I can just keep listening to that, it's going to tell me really interesting things that are way beyond whatever actions I would maybe shove myself into, which doesn't come from the bigger intelligence.
I think the last thing, that was beautifully said, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think the last thing I wanted to point to was Kieran Trace's teaching, which if you happen to have listened in order, it may sound familiar to you. But when she talks about these different stages or phases of evolution that we go through, and that, there's this first moment where we realize I have a choice. I don't have to suffer. Mm-hmm. So I'm not just tied to my circumstances, and that's a really powerful phase to recognize, right? Like, oh, I don't have to be depressed today. I don't have to feel anxious all the time. I don't have to feel like I'm a failure. That these things, I have some ability to shift this, right? And when you have that first level of awareness, which not everybody gets to, that's a very powerful thing for humans. And what that will evoke is managing your circumstances. Mm-hmm. So you'll eat differently, and you'll move differently, and you'll, sign up for a class, and you'll, go on a dating app, and you'll take control of the circumstances that feel like they're creating suffering. And that's good. And at that level, that is a bit of kindness for ourselves, right? Like, why suffer? If you can change something, you change it. That's like that Viktor Frankl quote that we've talked about. If you can change it, change it. Otherwise, you're a martyr, aka otherwise you're a victim of your circumstances. But then she goes on to say, but it's not exactly healing things, right? It's managing around them. Mm-hmm. So, why is it, for example, Vanessa, as I've said, I'm really like an extrovert in introvert's clothing. It's just that I take on responsibility for how people feel, yada, yada, yada. I have these pain bodies that do that, and this energetic patterning, so that when I'm around people, if they're not really close to me, I can get tired, right? So the first level is I realize that, and I go, well, great. I just won't be around people too much who I'm not close with, or I will, but then I'm going to manage it by going to get a massage, and I'm going to do energy work, right? And that's well, and that's good. That's the first level of awareness. That's where I can meet it. But I didn't change the root of it, which is this tendency of mine to take responsibility for how other people feel and the energetic patterning that's gone along with it. So then that next level that Karen will talk about is that then you kind of begin to transform it. You begin to transform it at the roots. Now I don't have to manage the circumstance and think all week, like, am I going to be around too many people? Should I say yes to this? Should I say no to this? How do I explain to my partner I need alone time? And all of these different things that come in with the management phase, because hopefully there's a level of healing and resolution so that you have the ability to not have to manage that circumstance. You have more of that flexibility and resiliency. Now, I guess what I want to say is that for us to do it alone and even with people, the management phase is good. And it's where you and I were at to a big degree, like a year or so ago, right? And we're still working with it. I still do it.
There's still certain things that require management for me because that's what I can bring to it.
That's where I'm at. That's what I can do. And for many of you, that's where you're at. And that's great. And if that involves like, yes, I can't stay in bed more than 2 days in a row, or I dip into this deep, dark pain body and there's a depression. So I have to manage that. And I know that. So I'm kind to myself. So the second day I'll get myself moving. That's wonderful. The next level, which is I think a lot of where we're always talking from, that level of transformation, I think actually requires support, quite frankly.
Tons of support.
Yeah. You need good allies. You need people who get that. You need to be talking to someone. You need your person, your team, your teacher, your sangha, call it whatever you will. So if that's not where you're at in your life, if that's not what's ripe, if that's not what's growing, cool. Just like take this as a seed for what's ahead.
Let
like
it
what
be.
can come. Let it be. And if you need to right now manage yourself, because otherwise there's a fallout. Like I used to, sugar was so hard on my body that I used to have a rule. If I ate it one day, I couldn't eat it 2. Because if I ate it 2, I became addicted and I ate it 3, 4, 5, 6. And that was the most kind thing, compassionate thing I could do for myself because there wasn't another way yet. And until there's another way, then yes, Heidi and all of you and us reminding ourselves, if you need to manage something, because that's what wisdom taught you, it's like, this is what needs to happen for now. It's the kindest thing I can do. Booyah.
Yeah. And again, these things are doing themselves. So just let it unfold naturally, because we can be aggressive, of course, like we can do it in every possible direction, but we can be aggressive about like, no, I can't just manage this. I can't just tell myself to get out of bed and exercise.
Just sit around until I know what else arises.
Ultimate transformation arrives, you know? And it's like that might not be what's up. Like that's fine. You know, I'm not eating sugar right now, guys, because I gained 10 pounds this winter because I ate a lot of sugar. But also because that arose as like, I was feeling all the stuff that I feel when I eat too much sugar, like foggy, brain fog, tired, funky, you know, and it's like, yeah, no, I'd rather have more clarity. That was a yes. That was a like desire. It won't last forever. I don't know. I'm listening. Like that might last for a day. And then like, that's the end. And then blah, blah, blah. Like it keeps unfolding. So again, like circling back to where we started from the beginning, what we're looking for is less suffering. And what our minds do is they contort everything in the direction of suffering, even your total freedom. It can make it, you know, some shitty chore that you're failing at, right? Like, so just be gentle with yourself and just ask yourself the question as you're getting to know yourself and as you're letting these things unfold, like, is this helping? Like in the sense that I'm suffering less, life's getting more nourishing, more delightful, more real, more genuine. Like then okay, like that's a yes.
Being inside of my brain is less painful.
Right.
Being inside of my mind, my thoughts are less painful.
Right. And you know what? Like I'm opening up a can of worms I shouldn't at the end. I was going to say painful is fucking fine. You know, like the germinating seed on the way to making a flower, like that's, I don't know. I'm not saying it feels pain, but like these moments in our lives where we're giving birth to big things like birth, right? Labor is painful. You're giving birth to something really important, another human being. Like sometimes there are periods of life where we don't have it together. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a can of worms. And I was thinking about that. Like, if you could just trust it's all okay. Like sometimes, I don't know where I did find this within myself. Like, I'm kind of like the ability to be like, yeah, that's all fine. Like, it's fine. Like, no matter what I do feel in some regard, it's fine. Like, it'll work itself out. It's fine.
I think that's what I'm trying to point to is that.
Yes.
Which
fine.
is simple. Like, it's.
And sometimes you
fine.
say it to clients, like this is why support is helpful at this level. Like, you're like, yeah, no, that's fine. It's fine. Like, of course you feel that way. It's totally fine. Like, and even if you quote unquote make a blunder, you do something discompassionately, or you do something with like too much indulgence, because that's the kind of middle ground that I think Heidi was getting at. Like, where does it teeter on indulgence in a way that's not kind and loving to yourself versus, when do you like have genuine compassion? And so how do we kind of like reconcile that balance? And it's like, yeah, sometimes you're going to overindulge, but if you stay aware, that won't last forever. And you'll understand more and you'll gain more wisdom and insight. And there's going to be sometimes where you push yourself too hard, you strive too much, and you didn't know it until you like utterly collapsed in some exhausted heap. And that's fine. Yeah. And that's just going to be more wisdom and more insight. And you're definitely going to do probably both of those many times, maybe in one day or a week. Mm-hmm. And yet it's fine. You're fine. The whole thing is fine. And the only thing that the ego loves to do is make everything into a problem.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to solve. That's why we're like, well, when all else fails, be compassionate, meet what's up with like that kind of like welcome and yes, because the big thing the ego does is make everything into a problem.
Right.
That's why that's the medicine we're always going for, is the antidote to that is, okay, and this too. Like, hi, yes, dimply thighs, welcome, like,
I see
yes,
you.
Striving,
I see
yes.
how much I don't like you. Yes.
I see that, and I see this, and I see overindulgence. Oh, I see that probably I shouldn't spend 5 days in bed. That was like a little much, fine. Don't make it into a problem.
Yeah. Just keep on keeping on. It's a learning curve for all of us.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. The show notes, including all of the resources that we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. Just go over to the website and scroll down and you'll see each episode's separate post, and we put the resources right in there. You can also come chat with us on the social media channel of your choice. Instagram and Facebook are where we're hanging out, and people are having some rich conversations with us, which is really fun. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you're feeling compelled to support us in the show, you can write a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which is, again, Bliss and Grit. It's really nourishing and fun hearing from all of you, and it helps other people find the show so we can keep growing a rich and beautiful and fulfilling community. If technology isn't your thing, but you are enjoying the show, well, then just tell your friends who you think it may resonate with. We want to give a huge bit of gratitude to all of you amazing people who have already taken the time to write reviews. And I wanted to read one today from Connie Suchia. I hope I'm saying your name right, Connie. Connie says, I'm an energy worker binge listening to Bliss and Grit. It is beyond affirming to learn so much about embodiment and the path. Vanessa and Brooke are passionate, articulate, and profoundly aware. Each episode is like a therapy session in my own home. If Bliss and Grit were a religion, I'd be a follower. My gosh, Connie, that is the sweetest review. It's so wonderful to read that. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you who've taken the time to share your kindness with us, and to those of you who are just listening. We're profoundly grateful. Okay, we'll be back next week.